Welcome once again. It's not ready chess this time. It's LA chess. I chose to decide to go for a new channel name this time because because I have been posting a lot of sports uh, edits lately. And I'm from LA, so I want to combine chess and sports together. But you know what else is big besides the name change? This over here. This is called Chess Classroom. Now, now you might be wondering, what is this? No, what the heck is this? We just have an empty board and we're just basically moving pieces. Well, that's the genius of it, because if you are struggling with chess openings, here is one of the most goated chess openings, in my opinion, that is ever played, and it's used by a lot of masters to today's age. Like you could say, on occasionally Hikaru, Prague, occasionally maybe Magnus Carlsen, but still, there's a lot of the famous players that have played this. And so I'm going to go over five of the most important variations of the Ruy Lopez opening you want to know. So let's get to it. So we have our usual starting position with e4 and e5. We have knight f3, and the Ruy Lopez opening only works if knight plays c6, and then you follow it up with the main move over here, bishop b5, right here. And they're trying to distract this knight over here and get advantage of this pawn. You might be wondering, that's the case. Well, it's actually not, because because over here the main idea of this is to get control of this entire center square. Allow me to demonstrate. Let's say if the knight moves to f6 and you want to protect this pawn, you could try this by castling over here. Whereas if you force the knight to take over here, you can slide in this rook and then just wins this pawn back, since they're laying a pin over here with this king on this side. Yeah, but apart from that, let's show what I mean by occupying the center of the square. Now, let's say if black tries to develop a piece over here, like going to bishop c5, you follow this move up by pushing the pawn forward to c3. And the reason for this is because you want to occupy this d4 square to remove one of black's center pawns, so that all there is on this fourth file over here are two pawns and developed pieces. So let me show. Let's see. Let's say if black moves, like, I don't know, d6 in this case. Now you can push your pawn up to right here. Now you're forcing this bishop to go back in this case, to somewhere over here, which is the best move, because if you're black, you don't want white to have two free pawns in the center of the square, or the center over here, while all your other pieces are and have rarely moved or cramped up. So this is correct. But let's say if black takes with the pawn over here, white can now take it, and this is exactly what I mean right here, forcing this bishop back. And look at how much space white has to occupy, and how much it's actually limiting black space over here. Who knows, you could develop the knight over here, and this knight might come in. You can just simply castle. And even though it's likely it's almost equal, white does have a good position over here. And in the long run, this is going to be beneficial for endgames and all, where you have at least these two pawns to possibly move up, saying if these survive the whole game. All right, so now let's go back to bishop b5. Now we have to start. No, let's first start at this by going to one of the variations called the main variation, where you usually have black trying to push this bishop away with a move like a6 right here, and then white might move back over here, and then black will play knight f6, and then white castles, and the black takes. Now you might be wondering, isn't this bad for black? Because white can slide this rook over here to e1. Well, yes, even though there is a pin over here, black does have a way to escape this. Like for instance, the black can put in a counter attack, hop in this b5 pawn over here, slide this bishop back because this bishop is a very important piece and it's occupying a lot of space. And so now black can stall over here by pushing this the d4 d7 pawn forward, supporting this knight over here. And with that, white might play a move over here, say like c3, trying to trying to slide in this bishop and try to attack the pawn for this knight from here. And then black can simply just protect all the pieces he has over here by moving the bishop to bishop e6 over here. And if he wants over here, you can actually he can actually move the pawn forward, trying to break open the black's pawn structure here. And usually, no, but you don't want to really take instantly. You want to first get your pieces developed. Like in this case, you would leave the pawn hanging and move to bishop e7. And yes, even though white can take a pawn, with this over here, this pawn is likely to be in trouble over here, as black has enough attackers over here to get this pawn for free. And also to note that this knight is on a good square over here. It's being supported by the pawn over here, and this bishop can come by later on to guard it if it can. And then after this, black will simply castle. And this, in most cases, it's called the open variation on the main line. It's kind of like the most analyzed line that we see in chess openings, really. And behind this, you've got to know a lot of theory over here, because looking at this, there's at least more than 7 moves over here that need to be memorized to like accuracy if you're gonna win tournaments. Because in tournaments, there's a lot of players that play the Ruy Lopez as white, and so you need to know how to. And so you need to know, or sorry, yeah, you need to know how to respond to it if you're black, or use it if you're white. And so that's the main line. Now when we go to the next one that we have over here. So we have our usual position, knight over here. And then after bishop b5, we have the most popular one, apart from the main line, for those who hate theory at all. It's called the Morphy's defense, where you play a6, trying to drag the bishop back, which is what we did. No, but instead of this over here, no, sometimes the black might not go for knight f6 in this case, because they don't, who knows, maybe they don't want to go into the main line or something. And then with this, black might respond with b5 over here, pushing this bishop back. And then black will support this, will try to attack this pawn on e4 with a move like this to knight f6. And white might castle, but black just simply develops over here by bringing in the bishop over here to c5. And yes, even though you might say that the c3 pawn can come here, well, black can at least stall over here by first getting this bishop to safety on b6, and saying in the event that white does play d4, then you have options over here. No, which in this is either to not let white take control of the center by not exchanging this e pawn, and instead supporting it with this d6 pawn. and that way white cannot take over here. And if white does try to be aggressive and push forward on d5, black can just maneuver around to like e7, and then with the intended move of moving to g6 right here. Wait, let me waste a move. You move the knight to g6, where your king side is fully armored right here, and you have two attackers on the king side, so it's an equal position over here. And speaking of that, you also have this pawn over here to attack on e4, saying if something happens, or it's actually, you don't have to move the knight to g6. Saying if white wastes a move like this, you can just attack the pawn here and break white's pawn structure. All right, so that's that over there. And so now let's go to one of the common traps over here. It's extremely rare that this trap is played in this case, but it usually starts with e4, e5, and f3, knight d6, bishop b5. It kind of continues off the Morphy variation, where you have bishop a4. And then black tries to support his pawn early on by playing d6. Now this is now sometimes there's a lot of cautious players that choose to avoid like any complicated aggression by moving this pawn to b5. So they just simply move this and try to develop this black bishop over here. And over here, once this is played with the intention of protecting this right here, you might no, but white can still move to c3 and try to move the pawn to d4, but it doesn't really work out because black does have the time to launch some counterattacks over here with knight f6 and possibly attack this pawn on e4 now that the pawn is supporting this and this other e5 pawn. And so with that, you could say some people choose to castle and play it safe. And in this position, you usually want to try to be aggressive, but not too much. And so over here, the best move for white in this case is d4. Now it is an aggressive move. Now looking at this, but this is with the purpose of trying to break black's pawn structure now that is much stronger compared to what white has besides developing pieces, and it's trying to force black to take so that this knight can slide in, and it's putting pressure on this overloaded knight right here. And the black doesn't do that. Instead, black tries to move the bishop around to b5. The bishop will go back, and then the black makes a sacrifice over here. Knight takes a d4 right here, and this entire purpose of this move is making the white fall for a trap here. Like, let's say if white says, hey, I get to win a free pawn, I might win a free pawn right here. Knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes. There's a tactic over here where you move your pawn to c5 right here. And yes, white, you can say, oh, I might just escape here. It's fine. No, this is no big deal. c5 shouldn't be a problem. I'll just attack this rook over here. Well, after this move, now black has another way of trying to annoy this queen over here, because look at what the purpose of the c5 move was. It's also to trap this bishop over here. Wait, let me say if the white's queen moved to over here, for instance, the black can just plant his pawn over here, and then white's bishop has nowhere to go. Its own pawns are blocking it, and it can't go on the left diagonal over here. So white would basically have to be forced to exchange. And when you lose a bishop like that, you know you're in serious trouble. So looking at the queen move over here, trying to hope that there's a counterattack over here, black simply can just slide in this bishop over here to e6, not only attacking this queen over here, but also protecting this rook with the queen. And so now white would have to move to a different place, like here. And black does not want to take with this, with the bishop, exchange bishops. Instead, black wants to trap it with one of its smaller, irrelevant pieces in this part of the game. And that way to force the exchange and then have a good hold over here, right on this king side over here. And so over here, this is this is like a highly suggested trap black has to play if they come across a situation like this. So let me show it once again. We have the pawn moves to d4, and then after once d4 is played, black might the best move for white is to try to not take anything just yet. instead of possibly pushing after you push b5 and the rook slides, then you move the knight over here, and then the knight takes, and instead you don't take with the queen over here. You instead you instead can just counter it. Like, for example, you can move this bishop to d5, for instance. You're attacking this rook, and you can get your queen up, saying the rook moves right here. This is the position that I'm sure white would want over here in this case, because look at how active white's bishop and the queen are, and this bishop has an open diagonal to move around. So this is what white should aim for instead of taking with the queen if it comes to this situation right here. Okay. All right, so now let's take a look at another variation right here, which is it's something called the Marshall attack. It's extremely rare, Ruy Lopez opening, but it can be effective if used properly. So we have our normal Ruy Lopez position, bishop b5, and then we have a6, bishop moves back to a4, knight f6, castles, and instead of black taking this e4 pawn, black tries to castle early by moving to bishop e7. Now, you might be wondering what's the point of moving the black bishop to e7 when we can move it to instead like bishop c5. Well, with this, you're basically trying to feed white the opportunity to move to c3, and then support it, follow it up with d4, and force this bishop back to a square. And so you're kind of wasting a tempo right here. So it's best to play it safe over here. After the castle is bishop e7, just castle first, and then you can just try to hold your position over here by stalling and allowing white to move to c3. And so after bishop e7, white might support this pawn over here since this knight is heavily, since the king is not pinned anymore. So it will move to rook e1. And then we have bishop b5 trying to move the bishop out of the way. And then we have a black castles over here. And so it's a tight position over here, but you could say it's still kind of equal. And over here, this is where the aggressive part of the Marshall attack comes, where white does try to make a push. c3, trying to go for d4 once again. But black has a way of responding to it over here with d5. And so now with this, you might And so with this, white might be inclined to take it over here. Pawn takes, the knight takes, and then white takes this e5 pawn. Black will have to exchange. And yes, even though you're up a pawn in this case, it's not really. This is the example of a risky position over here, where you could say I've won, but at what cost? Because in this case, black is actually up an advantage because first black has to address this knight problem, and it'll usually go to bishop b7. And look at how this bishop can be dangerous. It's wide up on this nice diagonal, and this rook is way out of place. The bishop can, oh, my bad, saying if like white tries to move the pawn forward, create its own pawn push right here, black can just respond with bishop d6, force this rook back, and possibly slide the queen in here. And look at this. Now white is now under pressure because there's now two bishops winding up on this diagonal on the king side, and then we got this queen doing some damage. If white tries to move to g3 to stop a check, black can move just here and then possibly move this knight out of the way and allow this queen to checkmate right here with the support of the bishop. So this over here shows another variation that black should aim for. No wonder. I actually feel like this is the strongest response to a Ruy Lopez opening, in my opinion. All right, so that's three. No, so that's the three variations, I think, already. And so now we're gonna go to another variation over here, which is called the Berlin defense, where black will usually respond by playing knight f6 and not try to go for this bishop over here. And the Berlin defense has been popular for quite a while. And actually, there's notable players. One notable player who played this a lot was Kasparov. Kasparov back in the day, where in this case, the black tries to create a threat over here on e4. White will castle, hoping to get into a main line over here. But instead, the black might not take just yet, as this could lead to the open variation that I had mentioned earlier in this case. And so with that, black might try to go for a6, move the bishop back, and then black might take. Black could take it over here, but try to move to e4 if they wanted to. This is kind of like this, one of the questionable, yet it's kind of a good move over here for the black in this case, because the black can just transpose this into a mainline opening, which is one of the nice things of the Berlin defense over here. This where you can move this, and sure, even though the knight can take, you can just defend over here, with the bishop, and then just make this into a tight position, just for the time being, unless you're able to find an opening. The Berlin defense, it's kind of almost the equivalent of, you could say, a mainline opening, except you just hold off on the knight attack on this pawn until one or two moves later. And then we'll go over possibly, and then we have one more variation to go over for the Ruy Lopez opening, which is called the classical variation, where after this you have bishop c5, where black tries to develop their piece and take control of the center. And in this case, white might go for a c5, no, c3, sorry, c3, the push over here, and then move the pawn to d4 in this case. But black can respond to this threat with by just moving the bishop back so that it doesn't have to move when the pawn comes. So we have bishop we have pawn d4, and you want to preserve this pawn right here, this pawn over here. You don't want to lose it. So in this case, you would black might go for a d6 over here to protect this pawn over here. And then but this over here would be a mistake in this case right here, because over here, look at how you're compromising your position, because this knight can't attack this pawn. It's being pinned. So the pawn has to take over here, black's pawn. And then white has the option to go to queen exchange over here early on. And then you're forcing black to castle, you're to lose castling choices over here. And then essentially you could exchange this knight, and then you have this knight over here attacking two pawns at once, and it has a good position where white can just castle in any case, and all of black's pieces over here are underdeveloped, except for this black bishop. Saying if black moves to d6, or in any other case, black might just move this a6 over here to move the bishop backwards right here. And then black will likely try to create counterplay of attacking this e4 space. And let's say if white takes over here, black can also take with this. And then in this case, white might try to move the queen over here to e2 to annoy it. But then, but this knight can actually create an attacking opportunity by going to knight c5, where the black's goal is to get rid of this bishop over here, because this bishop is very active right now. And so with that, you're forcing this bishop to go back to c2. And so this is an equal position right here, where there's no advantage, disadvantage over here, even though yes, white's pawn is pushed far up. No, even look at the white's pieces, how they're all backed up right here. But I would say in this case, I would favor white in this case, because look at how white's bishops are active on all these diagonals over here. Look at the space they have. And meanwhile, black's bishop over here is cramped up, and this bishop is yet to get active. So I would say this is a good position in the white's terms. A good position in white's terms, but black can still manage to come away with a win or draw depending on how the game goes. And so yeah, that's basically that's basically like the top 5 variations of this opening. It's extremely powerful if you're playing white, but if you're playing black, it might not be the one that you're looking forward to. But if you're able to counterplay and understand like the role of these bishops over here and the c3 pawn, you should be able to hold on over here. And if I give you statistics, just in case you're nervous, there's almost an average of 30% chance, 33% chance you'll draw, you'll win, and lose. So the odds are basically balanced. There's no like selective advantage in this case. So you shouldn't feel down. You should feel pretty lucky, saying saying if you take the time to practice, because these things take time to learn. Now, for me, when I'm doing it, make notes over here of the key, of the first key moves, and then kind of write separate diagrams as to show if this move is played, what variation would this be, and how to react to it. So it's something I would encourage you to do. No, well, no, well, that's that. I strongly recommend that you use this opening whenever you're playing chess games. And so that's already, and so yeah, this is all the top five Ruy Lopez openings of the variations. And then this is kind of like like I said, a goated opening. No, so definitely use this, and I'll see you once again if you want to come back and show me and how you dominated the others with this opening and the other variations as well.